Thank you very much. Today, I'm going to speak a bit about the impact of the COVID pandemic on women's entrepreneurship. And this has created a lot of challenges, but also I think there's opportunities. So I'm going to go through the example of the entrepreneurial ecosystem framework and how that can be used to suggest some positive changes. So I'll begin by sharing my screen with the slides. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen. So the title of today's talk is Rebuilding an Entrepreneurial Ecosystem in order to support women's entrepreneurship. And as you may have noticed, today is International Women's Day. So I think it's quite a fitting talk. And it's also something that's going to be getting a lot of press coverage. So I'm originally from Ireland, so I'm more familiar with the English language media, and I'm seeing a lot of reports in the national and international press. I'm also going to be quoting from a report done by McKinsey and Company, and also international institutions such as the World Bank are recognizing that this is a key issue and that action needs to be taken in order to support women's entrepreneurship. Okay. Sorry, there appears to be a problem with my slides. I just have to stop sharing 1 second. Okay. Um, sorry, there seems to be a um, Karen. Wait. Let's see. That's so strange. Yeah, whenever I start to change the slides, it's not allowing me to do so. Oh, wait 1 sec. Okay, sorry about that. Is everybody seeing my slides now? Okay.
Yes, it works.
So, yeah, thank you. So, quick brief introduction. Who am I? So I joined MSM in 2016. I'm Irish. That is relevant because I'm going to be drawing on some Irish examples. So a little bit about me. I've prior experience living and working in Ireland, in the USA. I was a Fulbright scholar in 2008. So that was when I first left Ireland to work. From there, I went to China, Belgium, Saudi Arabia, and now working in the Netherlands. My research focus is on women's digital and artisan entrepreneurship. This aligns quite nicely with MSM, and one of the things I really liked about MSM was that it had this globalized view of the world. So if you're familiar with MSM, you might know this already, but it was established in 1952 with a focus on global education. We've got international partnerships all around the world, and this provides me with the opportunity to work with international colleagues and students from diverse backgrounds, which, as you will see, given that I'm interested in entrepreneurship, this is something I'm very interested in, particularly entrepreneurship in different contexts. And so this has allowed me to build a greater understanding about what entrepreneurship is, and it's about more than profit and jobs, and different outcomes are valued in different contexts. And I'm going to refer to a study I did when I was working in Saudi Arabia on women's entrepreneurship and the impact of, or the outcome being social and cultural change in a very small way, but it shows just how powerful entrepreneurship is in order to lead to social and cultural change. So learning outcomes, very briefly. So hopefully by the end of today's or this brief talk, you should be able to understand why we should be concerned about the impact of the pandemic on women's entrepreneurship. Why is that a problem? And this is not of concern just for women. This is concern for everybody in society because of the impact it's going to have on economic growth. Going to give you a very brief analysis of the trajectory of entrepreneurship research. So how it started out and where we are now in terms of a research focus. Apply the entrepreneurial ecosystem approach to think about opportunities to facilitate women's entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurial ecosystem framework has been given a lot of attention because it looks at the impact of contextual factors such as policy, access to finance, social and cultural context, all of these things that impact entrepreneurial behavior. So we're going to use that framework to have a look at how we can better support women's entrepreneurship, and very briefly evaluate a couple of recommendations to rebuild entrepreneurial ecosystems to support women. Okay. Okay, so why women's entrepreneurship? Why should you be interested in women's entrepreneurship? Well, as I say to most of the students in my class when I do teach entrepreneurship, have you ever tried putting the word entrepreneur into Google Images? It's gotten a bit better because the first time I did this, it was mostly men. Now you are getting some female faces, but if you put it in, you mostly get white, relatively young men, and that is not a representative. And also as well, prior to joining MSM, I worked in Riyadh in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And in my position there, I was teaching entrepreneurship and also researching entrepreneurship. So I was engaged in a study of women digital entrepreneurs. And this was a context for what, and the women I interviewed were not motivated by money. They all came from quite comfortable financial backgrounds. So it wasn't about maximizing profit, but it was about the sense of self and self-worth. So the idea of changing their position within the family and also in terms of the wider social context. So I'll give a bit more background on that study. But that's why I'm interested in women's entrepreneurship, because we need to change who we view as a legitimate entrepreneur. So women's entrepreneurship is one lens through which we can do that. So can we agree? Increasing the level of entrepreneurship is a good thing. Even if you're not particularly interested in women's entrepreneurship, increasing the level of entrepreneurship is a good thing. Micro, small, and medium enterprises are one of the main drivers of economic development, innovation, and employment. Statistics from the EU show that they represent 99% of all small businesses, of all businesses actually. Women-led businesses, therefore, are an important component of economic development. What is good for gender equality is good for the economy and society as well. So focusing on women's entrepreneurship is not just good for women, it's good for the economy. So women and the pandemic. So I'm not sure how aware you might be of this, but recent research has shown that women-led businesses have experienced a significantly higher rate of business failure relative to those led by men. Why is that? It, for quite simple reasons. Unpaid work is increased for women, limiting the amount of time that they can spend on paid work. Industries dominated by women-led businesses, particularly in the services such as tourism and hospitality, have been particularly hard hit, and existing inequalities that affect women-led businesses have been exacerbated. So it's well documented that women-led businesses have a higher financial gap or liquidity problems relative to businesses led by men. Women-led businesses tend to have more limited networks, so that impacts their access to resources and information. So these well-known inequalities that exist have been exacerbated by the pandemic. So, and in particular, there's a particular group of women that have been most hard hit, and that are mothers. So, in data from the UK show that mothers are more likely than fathers to have left paid work since February, since the start of the pandemic in the UK. Among mothers and fathers who are still in paid work, mothers have seen a bigger proportional reduction in hours because they have to spend more time on unpaid caring work. And among those doing paid work at home, mothers are more likely than fathers to be spending their work hours simultaneously trying to care for children. That is because a lot of schools and childcare centres have been shut down. So obviously that care and education is happening in the home. And even in cases where men and women are both working from home, for a multitude of reasons, this tends to fall on the mother as opposed to the father. So this is from the Institute for Fiscal Studies in the UK. So in particular, now we're going to focus on self-employed mothers. So Data, quite a nice lobbying organization, it's called Pregnant Then Screwed, has collected survey data on the impact of the COVID pandemic on women, and mothers in particular are coming out very hard hit. 74% of those surveyed have found their earnings reduced because of lack of access to childcare, and 44% have had to give up their formal childcare space. This compares to 33% for employed mothers. So self-employed mothers are being extremely hard hit. And there's in the UK and in Ireland, where I come from, and in a lot of countries, there is a payment for those, like a pandemic unemployment payment. For self-employed people, that is calculated, in the UK, this is calculated based on the last 3 years' earnings. However, when that payment was being calculated, there was no provision for maternity leave. So that means if a self-employed mother took maternity leave within the last 3 years, the payment that she got from the government was reduced. Why? Because maternity leave was equated to a sabbatical. So a case was actually brought to the High Court about this provision, but unfortunately they lost. So it is still law, but that is where that is the level of support that is being given to self-employed women in the UK. So to put this into context, so in the call I said this was of interest to people who are interested in entrepreneurship and the factors that affect entrepreneurship. So women's entrepreneurship needs to be understood within the context of entrepreneurship research in general. So when entrepreneurship research started in the 1970s, the initial focus was on kind of characteristics of the entrepreneur, trait theory. So there was this idea that entrepreneurs as individuals exhibited certain characteristics, such as risk-taking, extroversion. This is what distinguished entrepreneurs from non-entrepreneurs. And so we have, I'm sure, so we have this idea or this question commonly posed: are entrepreneurs born or made? Since then, research has moved on, and there's greater focus on the influence of the context in which the individual is embedded on entrepreneurial action. So this might be like the regulations, the economic framework that exists will obviously impact entrepreneurship. So when we look at women's entrepreneurship, that is also something that is a move that is being made. So while we accept that in general this is an issue, in women's entrepreneurship, we're still trying to get away from this idea that it's down to the individual, that context matters. So a very interesting study by Marlowe and McAdam looked at a women entrepreneur in of a tech company in an incubator context. And this was the only woman-led business within this incubator. And in order to succeed to a certain extent, she had to become an honorary man. So she had to be she had to display behaviors that allowed her to be accepted as a man within this very masculine tech entrepreneurship context. Now, it's very difficult to become an honorary man when a woman becomes a mother, because there is more caring responsibilities. It's difficult to, like, the even things as simple as the working day have to be respected. So in general, while women can become accepted within a masculine context, they have to do so by becoming honorary men. When it is difficult for a woman to become an honorary man, it makes things much more difficult to succeed. So that is a general trajectory of entrepreneurship research: focus on the individual, then move into contextual matters. And that is how we need to look at women's entrepreneurship, not about the factors of the individual, but the context within which it is embedded. Okay. So this is the idea of fix the women. So women are not the problem, context matters. So early research on women's entrepreneurship, once it had identified that women tended to lag behind men, the focus tended to be on addressing skills gap, addressing a lack of finance, the fact that women-led businesses tended to happen in the informal sector. However, what we are seeing now is a greater awareness that the context within which women are embedded directly affects their ability to engage in entrepreneurial behavior. So rather than fixing women, we should fix the context in which they are embedded. And that is the purpose of the Entrepreneurial Ecosystem framework. So this was actually from an article that was released today. What is needed is a proper strategy, a proper women's strategy with specific policies to address the inequality triggered by COVID, or at real risk of heading right back to the 1970s with regard to women's economic power. So rebuilding on, so again, if we don't take action now, the overall level of entrepreneurship will contract. And as countries start to recover from the pandemic, the challenges we face actually give us an opportunity for change, to create a new normal that doesn't just support businesses led by men, but also highlights the importance of support specific to women. So what we want is not equality as such, but equity. So that means equitable treatment. So that doesn't mean that a gender blind policies, but actually policies that take into account the fact that women are have been disproportionately affected by the COVID pandemic. So the Entrepreneurial Ecosystem framework. An entrepreneurial ecosystem focuses attention on the wider context and highlights the importance of diverse factors, government regulations, cultural attitudes. So here is a nice picture of an entrepreneurial ecosystem framework. So this is, there are different manifestations of this, but this is one taken from Daniel Eisenberg. And it basically highlights the fact that attention needs to be focused on diverse factors. So we have, in terms of policy, finance, culture, business supports, human capital, and markets. All of these things interact and impact on entrepreneurship. So I'm going to go through a just brief explanation of each factor and maybe think about how we can look at these factors in order to support women-led businesses and women entrepreneurs. So just a thing to bear in mind, that how does an entrepreneurial ecosystem work? So no one individual or group represents the ecosystem. Each group is motivated, or each stakeholder group has different motivations. For instance, at the policy level, policymakers might be interested in facilitating entrepreneurship because of the impact on job creation or tax revenues. At the finance level, banks and other lending institutions might be interested in facilitating entrepreneurship because of the impact in terms of its loan portfolio. So nobody controls this ecosystem. There are just different actors or stakeholders that have an impact on entrepreneurship. And the purpose of looking at it as an ecosystem is to understand that it's not just one simple change that is necessary, but all these diverse factors have an impact on the level of entrepreneurial behavior. You can see this at a country level in that some countries or regions are more entrepreneurial than others. Why is that? Well, it's probably because of a mix of these factors. Okay. Okay, so just checking the time there. So how does it work? We've covered that. So in terms of policy, so this is a very important point. So policy includes institutions, legislation, regulation, and government actions. So we do not want gender blind policy making, because gender blind policy making does not consider the needs of women, and is giving the same support to everybody. And women are differently situated relative to men. So in terms of at the EU level, there's been a lot of emphasis on the policy initiatives to support businesses in the wake of the COVID pandemic. These have tended to focus on money for businesses, to keep businesses open or to pay employees. But what about policy interventions that are needed specifically to support women's entrepreneurship? So some of these should focus on childcare and tax policies that encourage both parents to work. And in the wake of the pandemic, when we see very high rates of unemployment for women, this is particularly important. Family-friendly, flexible working policies, again, very important. We are seeing actually, at least in Europe, we're seeing that actually that is becoming normalized. The idea that flexible working or remote working is becoming normalized and might actually be a right that people have rather than a request that is given at the discretion of an employer. And again, and we'll talk about this more, but also policies to promote digital inclusion and financial inclusion as a specific help to benefit women-led businesses. This is a report from McKinsey and Company, and they looked at 3 different scenarios, and it looked at the impact on GDP of different actions. And that is do nothing, wait to take action, and take action now. Even in the best scenario where action is taken now, female to male employment doesn't reach parity. It gets to 0.771%. But if we take no action, it's 0.61. It's a 0.61 female to male unemployment. That is a big difference. Even if we take drastic action, women are still going to be disadvantaged, but they're going to be disadvantaged less. Finance. What financial supports are needed to support women-led businesses? So special focus on women-led businesses to counteract evidence of significant financing gap. Even before the pandemic, at a world level, there's a liquidity gap, for a greater liquidity gap for women-led businesses relative to male-led businesses. So in particular, financial inclusion measures to promote gender diversity and funding for women entrepreneurs. What does that mean? Well, in terms of like venture capital funding, research has shown that women-led businesses are at a disadvantage relative to men-led businesses. Why? Because most venture capitalists are men. So it's a very basic thing, but it's having a major impact. So just some statistics from the International Fiscal Institute, World Bank Group. 90% of women-led businesses have faced a decrease in sales, reduction in cash flow, demand is plummeting, insufficient finance and working capital has led to liquidity constraints and insolvency. These are issues that were already a problem pre-pandemic and now are being exacerbated by the pandemic. This is also an important point in terms of cultural change. So the Global Entrepreneurial Monitor does studies for a number of different countries, and it looks at the overall level of entrepreneurship in that country. And one of the things that they are very focused on is the impact of the social and cultural context on entrepreneurship and the ability of entrepreneurial behavior to impact the social economic development of the country. So when we think about women's entrepreneurship, we need to think about, well, how is that impacted by the existing social and cultural context, the social norms of the place, and what societal changes are needed to promote women's entrepreneurship. So both in terms of things that negatively impact on women's entrepreneurship and positively impact it. So one change that we need to be looking at is to question maybe who bears responsibility for childcare. Is it a women's issue? Is this or is it a family issue? I would always have believed it's a family issue, yet I constantly hear every time childcare comes up, it's always put back on the woman that this is a women's issue. It's not, it's a family issue. So how do we change the culture? So the pandemic has increased care demands for children and elderly, which has reduced time spent on paid business. Changing at it. So an example I mentioned at the start that I'm from Ireland. We're a very developed country, yet in our constitution, there is an article that says a woman's place is in the home. By her life within the home, woman gives to the state a support without which the common good cannot be achieved. Mothers shall not be obliged by economic necessity to engage in labour to the neglect of their duties within the home. So today in 2021, a woman's primary place is in the home, according to the Irish Constitution. Hopefully post-pandemic we will change that, but obviously that has an impact on social and cultural attitudes, which also feeds back into the fact that we have, for a very developed country, a very underdeveloped childcare system. So how can we change that? Well, I mentioned at the start that I previously worked in Saudi Arabia, and this is some quotes from a study I did on women's entrepreneurship. And one of the big findings of this study was that actually by engaging in entrepreneurship, women were able to change the structure of relationships within the family, which should over time have a positive impact at the societal level. So this is from one of the entrepreneurs and these quotes are from the paper, it's at the bottom. So one of the entrepreneurs said about her relationship, now they accept it, entrepreneurship, and they're supportive and they allow me to travel alone. Sometimes, ironically, when my sister wants to travel, they say, okay, you're going to go with your sister now, or you're not going. I am now the guardian. So the idea that before she engaged in entrepreneurship, there's a legal requirement for a male guardian. But as a consequence of engaging in entrepreneurship and showing that she can succeed, the family now have accepted this, and they kind of joke that she's now the guardian of her younger sisters. So one of the ways that this was achieved as well was sharing the small wins or successes with the family to make them feel proud and believe in FB. FB is the name of the business. I always like to think that we actually created this opportunity for other Saudi ladies. I'm actually very proud of that. I don't feel any competition or anything. So there is also awareness that by doing this, by engaging in these behaviors, which have a very direct impact on their own family relationships, that's also opening opportunities for other women. So this was this study showed me that actually that entrepreneurship outcomes other than profit maximization and job creation are very important, and that entrepreneurship in different contexts has different outcomes that are valuable. Okay, this was just briefly, this was a model that is in the paper that was used to convey that point. So previous research has shown that macro level, the institutional context, has an impact on micro level action. But our study actually showed that there was also the opposite effect, where individual action, individual engagement in entrepreneurship also impacted macro level change in terms of the social and cultural context. Okay, so now to get back to the framework. So one of the other parts in terms of the entrepreneurial ecosystem framework was about the idea of supports. Excuse me. So then that poses the question, what business supports are needed to support women entrepreneurs? There's obviously a lot of business supports that are needed to support entrepreneurship in general, in terms of adapting products and services to new changes, new demands in the local market. A big change that actually we're seeing is in terms of shifting to a digital business model. So that's something I'm going to come back to as well, is the idea that businesses that might only have existed offline, brick and mortar businesses, are now very quickly having to go to the online environment. And that is something that needs to be supported. So in this study from We Connect International, which looked at women-led businesses, 42% have been able to make the shift to a digital business model in a very short period of time. But there is going to be a skills, a human capital gap that needs to be addressed. But if we want to focus on supporting women-led businesses, a big focus needs to be on support for digital products and services, digital business models, digital markets. So in order to address this, we might have to actually look at human capital. Remember, all these parts in the ecosystem are interconnected. So human capital in terms of education, labor, skills, and expertise. So one of the key areas needs to be addressed should be in terms of digital inclusion. So supports to increase digital literacy and digital inclusion so that brick and mortar businesses can become digital businesses. So in the previous slide, 42% of businesses have been able to shift to this business model in a very short period of time. This is an example of a company that I use. It's from my region in Ireland, and the two co-founders actually have one of them has a digital marketing background, so they were able to very successfully create a small business with a global reach. But they have this background themselves, whereas other businesses might not have this background. So one of the ways that we can support women-led businesses is ensuring that there is not this digital divide in terms of access to digital resources. And that leads me to the final piece of the framework, which is about market access. So in particular, digital markets. So how can market access and knowledge be increased to support women's entrepreneurship? I think this also relates back to the point on human capital, that maybe increasing knowledge and awareness of digital business models and how they can be achieved. This is actually, it's a case study of a cheese-making business in Ireland, which was actually the subject of my PhD. So I interviewed all the small cheesemakers in Ireland. So this is actually a company that I did not interview, so they must have formed after I collected my data in 2008. But this is a brick and mortar business. They would have supplied local customers, restaurants, hotels. Obviously that stopped with the pandemic. So they've had to very quickly go online in order to keep the business open. So this is something that needs to be supported and helped if we're going to ensure that small businesses survive. And again, in particular, I do think there is an argument that there needs to be a policy specific to women-led businesses, given the greater constraints faced. Okay, so that brings, in the last few slides, I would have talked a bit about digital businesses in terms of digital markets, digital business models. Digital entrepreneurship in general holds a lot of promise. It's been positive as a means to overcome limitations in the institutional environment, including unsupportive cultural practices with lower barriers to entry, enabling what has been very hopefully described as the democratization of entrepreneurship. So that assumes that because these digital businesses are a friendlier place, by friendlier I mean easier to access for people regardless of gender. So what constitutes a digital business? Maybe it's a high-tech product or service, so a digital product or service, but it also could be in terms of greater use of digital marketing, sales, distribution, and now in particular we are seeing in terms of digital operations and remote working. However, anybody who has suddenly had to go from going to an office to doing all their work through Zoom will understand that there are limitations to remote working and digital operations. However, there has been a pushback against this overly optimistic view of digital entrepreneurship, which is saying that offline inequalities actually are reflected online. So some research in the UK has shown that in a developed economy with a significant wealth inequality, that offline inequalities are simply replicated online, and digital technology was insufficient to overcome the resource constraints faced by immigrant women. So in fact, what this study found is that when women started to sell online or create online businesses, like the problems that they faced in setting up a brick and mortar business was replicated online. So this might be in terms of access to finance and things like that. So it wasn't necessarily a solution to the problems that women-led businesses fail. However, my research in Saudi Arabia indicates that in pursuing digital entrepreneurship, women digital entrepreneurs are enabling transformative change within the wider entrepreneurial economy. So in short, while digital entrepreneurship holds significant promise for women entrepreneurs, we shouldn't look at this with rose-tinted glasses. That women-led businesses still will continue to face significant challenges, and we must proactively support them if we want them to continue. So briefly, reflection recommendations, but this is just a brief recap on some of the issues raised. So we need policies specific to women entrepreneurs. Gender-blind policy making ignores the specific problems women face. Financial inclusion is a key issue. Women entrepreneurs face greater liquidity gap relative to men, existing inequality exacerbated by the pandemic. And we need to develop a culture that supports women entrepreneurship and social norms. So, example of social norms which do not view childcare as a woman's responsibility. We need to provide business supports that facilitate a digital business model, focus on human capital in terms of the development of digital skills, and access to digital markets to allow small businesses to scale. Okay, that's all, folks. So the purpose of this talk, I know it has been marketed as a masterclass, but it is not to provide answers, it's to generate questions. So I want you to think about what biases have you internalized about women entrepreneurs? What constitutes a legitimate entrepreneur? What can I or we do to support women entrepreneurs and women-led businesses? And what will my city, region, country look like in 2030 if we fail to support women? So this talk is part of the International Women's Day program under the Choose to Challenge. A challenged world is an alert world, and from challenge comes change. So let's choose to challenge. So I hope this talk has made you rethink some of these questions that I raised here. And I hope you find it interesting, and I think we have some time for questions, Wendy. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Karen. I will submit the questions to you at this moment, okay. So you can start.
Right. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now.
Okay, let me see.
message. Should we not rather focus on girl child, who is a future woman, now than more than ever before? Yes, I totally agree that that like focus and like, and especially in terms of the pandemic, I think it's been well documented that girls have less access to education now, and that there are a lot of major issues that girls will be very much impacted by what's happening in the world, and we're going to see that coming down the line. But that was not the focus of my talk, because my research area is entrepreneurship. So for this talk, I wanted to focus on women's entrepreneurship, but I completely agree that focusing on the impact that this is having on young girls is very important. As a team, how do we relate the team? We're building an entrepreneurial ecosystem to support women's entrepreneurship, considering at this time unique. Okay, so the question was about relating the team. Choose to challenge, the title of my talk, which is about rebuilding the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Well, I want you to challenge the framework that the existing entrepreneurial ecosystem is based on. So the existing entrepreneurial ecosystem is gender blind. It doesn't look at how women are impacted to a greater extent, by limitations in terms of finance, government policies, the social and cultural context. So I want you to think about how you can challenge the existing status quo and how that can be done in a way that facilitates women's entrepreneurship.
So Karen, that was the last question that I received at this moment. So we can wait a few minutes. Perhaps someone else has another question. And in the meantime, I can already thank you for this inspiring online masterclass. I hope everybody has enjoyed it. And I would like to welcome everybody for our next online masterclass, which will take place in April, on 15th of April. But we will send the invitation soon. So let me see if we have any questions. Yes, here it is.
I think I have it
yes?
as well.
Okay, so good.
I'll just read out the question. Encourage women entrepreneurs, however, reducing their working hours with the same wage rate like men. There is another important organization, family, to be concentrated. And I believe my mother took part more than my father in growing us. My question is, do you think anything like this? I think what your question is saying, I'm not really sure. I think what you're saying is in terms of the unpaid work that women do in terms of the family. And one of the points I was trying to make is that actually we need to look at childcare as not just a women's issue. Even in very developed countries, it's still the way that that childcare is a women's issue. It's not, it's a family issue. And at the end of the day, unless you're extremely wealthy, both partners work, both partners' wages are being used to pay for family bills. So in that context, it makes sense that childcare is looked at as a family issue, because both partners' wages are being used to pay for the expenses of the family. So if only one partner can work because of childcare, that reduces the family income. So I think it's a shift in mentality of not looking at this as a women's issue, but a family issue, which will then have an impact on the social and cultural context, which will in which entrepreneurship is embedded. Because if we do not value women's work outside the home, it will make it very difficult for women to work outside the home.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no more questions, I think,
Okay.
Karen. Yes. Okay, well, thank you very much, Karen, again. And thank you all for joining. And we hope to welcome you in another masterclass.
Okay.
next month.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Oh, one question just came in terms of the laws are gender blind. Um,
Okay.
so one of the policy supports come from laws. I see laws of many countries are gender blind. The chambers are male dominated. What is your advice on this? Well, the thing is, it's not my advice. It's what I'm doing is not giving answers, but raising questions. So, um, and the question, and as you've seen, so the idea is that we need to be aware of the fact that that if laws impact entrepreneurship and these laws are gender blind, well, maybe we need to move away from being gender blind, that we need a specific focus on how laws and supports to facilitate entrepreneurship impact women. So in terms of advice, what can we do about it? Well, we can lobby at a grassroots level. We can call for change. This is, for instance, I know this is happening in terms of childcare at the moment because people are realizing just how important formal childcare arrangements are. And Ireland, where I come from, okay, I work for MSM in the Netherlands and I live in Belgium, but I'm very aware of what's happening in Ireland. There's now a greater call for better quality childcare. In terms of legal arrangements, this could be done with more women ascending to important legal positions. But it's generally just because the point of the talk, though, is to become aware of how these different things work together to affect women's entrepreneurship. How we change them, that's the difficult part. But becoming aware that the problem exists is the first step towards change. Okay. Yeah, and then there was a question about sharing slides. Yeah, Wendy's going to share the slides and also a recording of the talk.
Yes, definitely. Okay. I'm not sure if did you receive any questions in your private chat or
I'm seeing, I think it just, I get, okay, I think I've just got one more. I think we've only got time
yes,
for this
yes,
last
that's
one.
the last
How,
one.
how can we lobby for women entrepreneurial activities to be reflected in the business growth? Well, they are reflected. So, in terms of economic development indicators, it's the total entrepreneurial activity that is counted. If we want to make it specific to women-led activities, I think that data is being collected in a lot of different countries. There, if they provided they make the distinction between women-led and male-led businesses. So I think there is a recognition that these businesses are there, and that women-led businesses are an important component of entrepreneurship in general. What's not being recognized is that in order that women-led businesses need more support. So I think the first step is recognizing that this problem exists. So I think when I was researching for this talk, I noticed that there is a lot actually being written about it, and this problem is being recognized. But so the first step is already happening. We are understanding that women-led businesses are being disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And then it's about grassroots change. It's about looking at the different factors in the ecosystem and looking at, well, what can be done differently? And the World Bank is as one example. It has recognized that this problem is there, and they're already suggesting different things. So I've made a number of suggestions based on the research in terms of what can be done in terms of government policies and so on. But it's not just one simple change. I think a lot has to change. But the first step is recognizing that the problem exists. Okay. Okay. I think that's it. Thank you very much. I hope you found this interesting. And I think Wendy's going to share with you the slides and the recording. And if you want to give me an email to follow up on any issues, I'd like to hear from you. But I'm not the only one who's going to be talking about this. Maybe it's because it's International Women's Day, but there's a much greater awareness that the pandemic is having a major impact on women in general and women-led businesses. So so hopefully if this is a topic you're interested in, I think there's going to be a lot more information out there. Thank you very much.